Thank you. All right. So today we're going to, as I said, explore the Fear Cascade and the cliffs of safety, building resilience with neuroscience. The first two tiles, I'm sure you all have covered with your wonderful opening today. And I loved all the music too. I had to turn my camera off for one of them because I started dancing. But the next four squares are what I'd really like to invite us all to do today. I'm inviting us to approach this new information, might not be new to you, but the information we're all sharing today with curiosity. Peg Boehm has pulled together research that demonstrates that curiosity engages our cortex, whereas certainty engages our fear center, our limbic system, because our fear center can only see in extremes. So even when the extreme is in the positive, like, I know I'm right about this, the fear center wakes up and it's like, oh, I must be on now. And we're going to look at today why that could be a bit challenging. To do this, we have to be brave. We're going to naturally want to lean into things that interest us, but things that are new or different, our fear center is going to want to do its job, which is to shut us down. I'm going to invite us to use our courage to lean out instead of shutting out, because this allows us all to keep learning and growing, because everyone here is important and unique, and we all have gifts to offer and share. Often when I'm learning these new ways of looking at the world or new ways of working with the people that I serve and support, I think, man, I did that wrong when I was a second grade teacher in the 1980s. Woo, what did I know? So then I hear Maya Angelou reminding, we did then what we knew to do, and now that we know better, we do better. And just that simple quote can keep our dopamine receptors open so we can continue learning. Because when we shame ourselves, we release enough cortisol to block our dopamine receptors and keep us from learning or performing to our highest ability. Thank you, Claude Steele, for that amazing research. So the hand brain is the brainchild of Daniel Siegel, and he uses his hand to represent a model of the brain. I'm going to break it down for you as it makes sense to my brain. So between our wrist and our elbow is our vagus nerve, which comes off of our spinal column and wraps around every organ of our body from the tip of our head to the tips of our toes. Its job is allow us to feel our feelings in our body. So if you think of you're driving down the road and everything's going fine, and then someone cuts you off, that feeling you get through your whole body, that's your vagus nerve doing its job. Or maybe you're home and you're cuddled up on the couch with someone that you love or your favorite pet, and all feels right with the world. That's your vagus nerve doing its job. It comes online at 23 weeks gestation. Thank you, Stephen Porges and Sue Carter. And it starts recording memory then as body sensation only. Because the vagus nerve can only function in body sensation, it interacts with the world that way, it interacts with us that way, and it records memory as body sensation only. The next part of our brain is that brain stem. It's going to rest right on top of our spinal column. And I know this is the Disney version of the brain for people who are real scientists and physicians, but I find it very helpful when I'm working with staff and children, and I do a lot of work with people with developmental differences. And this brain stem is in charge of everything we don't want to have to think about, like breathing, digestion, bladder and bowel control, heart rate, blood pressure. It also communicates and makes sense of the world and records memory is body sensation only. The best way to reach our brainstem is to notice our breath. And when we notice our breath, it actually calms our heart rate and our blood pressure without us even having to change our breath. Now, you can change your breath and do it even more quickly, but just by noticing your breath, research shows, and whose research is that? That is not Frank Putnam, Bruce Perry. Bruce Perry's research shows that it actually calms the brain, and you just notice your breath. No need to change it. The limbic system is going to be represented by our thumb right in the center of our brain. And today we're going to be focusing on the amygdala, but the name of that is unimportant. We're going to focus on the part that controls felt safety, attachment, and regulation, spells the word FAR. I sometimes call the felt safety part the fear center. And then as we explore the fear cascade, we're going to look at what happens when our fear center or the amygdala, part of our limbic system, takes over. The limbic system communicates and makes sense of the world through body sensations and pictures, which is going to come in handy for the next part of our brain, which is our cortex, the only part of our brain we have conscious control over. So literally 3/4 of our brain, we don't have conscious control over, which is not an excuse, but it is a context that we need to understand so that we can direct interventions in a manner that can reach these lower parts of the brain. So the cortex is in charge of all those wonderful executive functions, and it also assists us with empathy and regulation. The cortex, Lou Cozolino has pulled together research that is demonstrating that the cortex isn't fully grown until sometime in the mid-30s. So for those of us who have passed our mid-30s, if you think back to something you did in your early 30s, you might be like, what was I thinking? Well, good news, your cortex wasn't fully developed yet. So you weren't completely thinking it all the way through. This part of the brain communicates, records memory, and makes sense of the world through pictures and words. That means pictures have the passport from the thinking brain that we can control to the rest of the brain that we don't have conscious control over. And why this is important is because when our limbic system decides that something's unsafe, and it does it in 1/14 millionth of a second. Thank you, Christian Kaiser. 1/14 millionth of a second to decide totally safe or totally unsafe. And since it can't see anything in between, if it cannot decide or cannot tell, it always assumes unsafe. And this limbic system then throws our thinking brain offline. And we don't have conscious control over when it happens. It decides for us. And when that happens over and over and over again, like it does when we have toxic stress or trauma, our life can become an emotional roller coaster and feel out of control. We can do actions we're not aware of, or if you're in a fight with your spouse, you say the one thing you promised yourself you wouldn't say. And sometimes the people we serve and support don't even know why they're doing what they're doing. Once again, not an excuse, a context that lets us know we need to help them use pictures then to get and keep their thinking brain online. Bruce Perry likes to remind us that it's our job to regulate and relate so everyone in the room can reason. And when I first saw this, I was able to be in a small group consultation with Dr. Perry, and I said, help me understand the order you chose, because I know you chose it for a reason. But my understanding is that in order for us to regulate, we must engage positive relational memories, PRMs. So really, we need to relate before we can regulate. But you have it in this order for a reason. And what is that reason? And he said, well, thank you for asking. It is in this order because I train educators and other physicians mostly. And I want people who are in positions of power, whether you feel powerful or not, to know that if they don't show up regulated, the rest of the people in the room cannot relate to them. And if the rest of the people in the room can't relate to them, none of us are reasoning. So it's our job when we have a position of power, whether we feel powerful or not, to show up regulated. So those who are here to serve and support can relate to us, which allows all of us to reason. And everything I just yammered you about is right here on this slide. So what happens when our thinking brain, our cortex, goes offline? Well, when our limbic system takes over, we do something called the Fear Cascade. Now, I'm sure all of us are well acquainted with fight or flight, but I'm going to introduce you to the rest of the F family today. And my thanks to Stephen Porges in the polyvagal theory for his work on this, and his wife, Sue Carter, for her very early work and ongoing work on the flock response. So the very first thing our brain actually wants us to do is not fight. It's not even flee. It wants us to flock. It wants us to go, if at all possible, towards safe others. But if we can't go towards safe others, we'll go to unsafe others. When we do that, we can do that in a variety of ways. Gangs, violent, hurtful relationships. Self-injurious behavior is a form of an unsafe flock because we can draw people to us to help us then. Addiction is often a form of unsafe flock because people struggling with addiction often engage in their addictive behaviors in groups. So it feels like connection. I'm sure many of us have worked with people who have been suicidal and may have heard the phrase, oh, they're just doing it for attention. Well, my request today is that after learning about the Fear Cascade, we never ask someone to risk their life to get connection, because attention seeking is connection needing. And what Gregory Frishon's research has shown us is that connection is our greatest human need and disconnection is our greatest fear. And that holds true all the way down to a neurobiological level. So if we can't flock, or our brain thinks we can't flock, then it wants us to flee. When we do that safely, we can be leaving a problematic situation or saying, I need to take a break during an argument. But many of the people we serve and support, and us as well, sometimes do it unsafely by running away from things or hiding. Suicide attempts are another way to flee. Addiction is a way to flee pain. So you will see that some of these are going to show up in all of the categories, which is going to be a positive and a negative. If we can't flee, then we will fight. In the work of Russell Strand, who works with people who have survived sexual assault in the military, has found that we actually only fight in the service of fleeing. And to function well in the military or in jobs like being a firefighter or a police officer, we actually have to retrain those people's limbic systems to go toward danger, to fight before they flee, which is why in World War I, actually more people fled the battlefield on both sides than stayed and fight, because we hadn't learned yet how to reverse that. The other thing that Bessel van der Kolk, you'll see at the end, is now trying to do is that when your military service is over or you retire from one of those fields, how do we help turn your brain back so that we don't go to a fight response immediately every time? Now, fighting can be very assertive: exercise, sports, all of those things. Protest, safe protest is a form of fighting that is safe. Mothers Against Drunk Driving is one of my favorite examples of that. Humor that does not hurt others. So when you're not making fun of others to make people laugh, that the type of humor that does not make fun of others is the type of humor that is a safe fight response. Unsafe fight response, obviously, are all forms of aggression. Once again, suicide attempts fit into here. We're fighting the pain. Addiction is a way to fight both pain and shame. Self-injurious behavior is a way to fight social shame and pain. So all of those things can be safe or unsafe. Now, those three are coming from our limbic system: flocking, fleeing, and fighting, and they are there to help us survive. Once the brain decides we're not going to make it, it actually gets our limbic system out of the way, and we move into our brainstem and we prepare for death. And one of the first things that happens is we can go into a freeze response. If you're actually dying, it can look very catatonic. If you've ever been into a nursing home, you may have seen someone who's in the same position when you leave as when you arrived. They're in their brainstem, their freeze response is kicked in, and they're getting them ready to pass on. As your organs shut down, if your body is left to do what it is designed to do, frequently it will curl into a fetal position. But what does this look like when the brain thinks you're dying, but you're not actually physically dying? Well, it can look like depression. It can look like being stuck. It can look like not protecting children, which is not an excuse, but it is a context we must understand. And I learned this one personally the hard way when I was the mental health liaison for Children's Services for many years. And when I would go at parents with shame and guilt, how come you're not protecting this child? What is wrong with you? Every child deserves protection. They actually went into the submit response and actually started protecting the perpetrators, because I had come at them with shame, which pushed them deeper into this response. So what I found actually working in a really amazing program that worked with women who were addicted to substances, already had children and were pregnant, and they got to come and live there with their children and learn a whole new way of being. We discovered that when we played with their imagination, and this is the work of Peter Fonagy in England, we played with their imagination and invited them to consider what they wish their life had been like. And we actually had them rewrite timelines of their lives stating and playing with what they wish their life had been like. And when they would get to the age of their child that they were struggling to protect, as they rewrote their own life experiences, their empathy centers came back online for themselves, and then their empathy centers came back online for their children. It was really a wonderful 3-year experience we got to have learning that lesson. So we also can freeze and submit in very safe ways. That's what prayer and meditation is. If you flop in front of the TV at the end of the day and watch a TV show or two to numb out, that's a great way to go into a safe freeze response. And we all go into a safe faint response when we sleep, which is why we call it falling asleep. We have to release our cortex and even our limbic system so our brainstem can take over and the rest of our brain can rest. Now, if you've had to go into freeze submit as a survival skill, which means freezing and then giving in to the most violent person in the room, when you have to go into freeze submit safely, your brain thinks you're over here and often kicks you into a fight response. So many of the youth we serve, we can get them to do things by getting them to submit, but unfortunately, the next level up is fight. So the next level of safety, next time they feel safe, they get caught in a fight submit cycle. I see this frequently on residential treatment centers. I see this at developmental centers. You know, the staff they're afraid of, they do everything they're supposed to do. And then the staff they like comes on and all kinds of hell breaks loose because they're in the next level of safety up. What we're going for is a safe flock. When people can see how their actions contribute to the greater good, or how rules are actually connected with safety, not just power over, but safety, then they get a sense of belonging and they go toward a safe flock. All of you probably do the work you do, yes, because of a paycheck, but mostly because of its contribution to the greater good. If all you wanted was a paycheck, there's many other things you could do with your gifts and talents that could bring you way more money. But you're here because you're in a safe flock. Your career is a safe flock. So one of the things we found is that people who struggle down here because they get thrown over here, if we do something that involves concentration and movement, we can create a bridge between a safe fight response and a safe freeze response. Yoga is a beautiful example of that. Bruce Perry in the Columbus City Public Schools has designed little tracks around certain classrooms that the teachers will allow it, and students can get up and walk the track to help their cortex organize, but also calm their fear center and then allow them to get into a safe freeze submit response so they can study. And I put that one in purple because my buddy Prince from the 1980s, he would be my recommendation for music, taught us that red, hot, and blue makes purple. Thank you, Prince. And I just want to leave you today with 3 versions of the Fear Cascade. This is the one that our Children's Services likes because it's all in pictures. Remember, pictures have the passport to the lower regions of the brain. This is another one developed by a high school student. I love this one because she pairs it with the hand brain, and then it's easier to teach that when you're on the safe side, your cortex is in the driver's seat and your fear center's in the passenger seat, giving you courage and urging you on. But when you're unsafe, your fear center actually gets in the driver's seat, which is not in our best interest, or down here, our brainstem actually can get into the driver's seat, which is really not in our best interest. I'm going to leave you with a couple of activities for you to do for yourself and others. One is called liftoff and landing and cooling your jets. So liftoff is noticing things that upregulate us, things that bring us joy and give us energy. Landing are noticing things that we do when we're down regulated, but we often forget to add, these things also need to bring us joy. What things do you do that calm you and bring you joy? I found by working with women who had survived domestic violence that if we just asked them to look at what calms them, they would flip into the unsafe freeze submit response. So they pointed that out to us. And so then we said, what calms you and brings you joy? And then they could stay on the safe side of the fear cascade, the cliffs of safety. Something we all take for granted because we do it naturally. But if you're on the autistic spectrum or have toxic levels of stress or trauma, your brain cannot do this without assistance, which is bring yourself down once you are upregulated. People in those situations cannot downregulate without assistance. So take some time and notice, what are the things that literally help you transition from work to home, help you transition from a night out dancing to going to sleep? I think coffee shops really came in handy there for young people, way younger than me. But what is it you do when you're upregulated that transitions you into a downregulation? So we do all these things with the people we serve and support, and that actually helps us begin to recognize what's on their cliffs of safety. Because when you're over here on the Fear Cascade, you can cross over to the cliffs of safety if we know how to walk them over and help them find connection in safe ways, help them engage energy in safe ways, and help them find safe ways to relax. So after you do your liftoff, landing, and cooling your jets, see if you can list them here. Today, as you're listening to the presentation, see if you can list the strengths of the person on the cliffs of safety. And then how do we list their challenges over here? And it's not about getting it right. It's about just getting your brain used to thinking in terms of safe connection, safe action, and safe stillness. And those can all run together. Some things are, going to church for some people is safe connection, safe action, especially if you're Catholic, because it's like an aerobic activity. You're getting up and down so much. I know from my life experience in that faith. And then also you have quiet prayer time. So many things can be all of them. And Bessel van der Kolk says this is important because upregulation and downregulation requires us to have physical self-awareness. And that is the first step to releasing the tyranny of the past and being fully alive and present in the present. Because trauma memories, and Bessel's the researcher who discovered this using World War II concentration camp liberators in his research, which makes me very proud because my father was a concentration camp liberator. He didn't live long enough to be in Bessel's research, but by working with those veterans and studying their brains when he would put them into flashbacks, he discovered that flashbacks live in that lower 3/4 of the brain, not in our cortex. And so when we can help ourselves notice what we feel in our body, the part of our brain we don't have conscious control over, and find ways to regulate, we can release the tyranny of the past and become fully alive in the present. Thank you so much for having me today. Most importantly, thank you for the amazing work you do every day. We need more people like you in the world.